Okay, this is the third block of our lecture 7, and we are going to talk about inference when we have a nonlinear machine learning methods. Okay, so the approach I'm going to describe here is based on the double debiased machine learning for treatment and structural parameters. It's published in the Econometrics Journal by Viktor Chernuzikov and his co-authors. Okay? So the idea is as follows. Suppose that we are interested in a parameter theta naught, okay, here. That's the coefficient of the effect of a variable dt on yt, right? And we have a number of controls, okay? But contrary from what we saw with Lasso and friends, now we have a nonlinear function that we call g naught of this large set of controls z. Okay, and we assume there is also a relationship between our variables d and our controls z, and this relation is potentially nonlinear. Okay, so the idea is how should we conduct inference on theta naught, okay, once we control for these nonlinear effects of zt. Okay, so theta naught is the parameter of interest. Here we are considering a scalar, but the method can be generalized to a vector of finite dimension. Okay, zt is a set of p control variables, and we allow p to grow, and to grow even faster than the sample size. And u and v are error terms. Note that we are assuming that m naught is the condition expectation of d on z, and we also considering with this assumption here that the condition expectation of y on d and z is given by dt theta naught by plus g naught zt. Okay, and as I mentioned before, theta naught is of finite dimension. G and m are defined in terms of potentially nuisance parameters of infinite dimension, so we are kind of going to estimate them non-parametrically. Okay, we can use the methods of sieves, for instance, and we can also consider neural networks, as we saw during the first two blocks of this lecture. Okay, so what we know about estimating theta naught by usual ML methods. Usual ML methods were fine for prediction, but inference on theta is much more intricate. And it's intricate because the usual convergence that we have in traditional models will not hold. Basically, the square root of t theta hat minus theta naught will diverge. Okay, and why is the case? There is a mathematical intuition for that we can, because usually what we know in the linear regression setup, if we look at the linear regression with p fixed, what we have is that square root t theta hat minus theta naught, this will converge in distribution to a normal random variable, zero mean, and covariance matrix omega, and we can easily compute this omega. Okay? Omega will be sigma square expected value of x prime x minus 1. Okay, that's the usual result for linear regression. When we have a nonlinear component like the g naught component here, what happens is that what we call the scaled bias, okay, we can write this as the inverse of the average of the square d, okay, times 1 over square root t sum of dt ut. So this is the the term that we know how to handle this term. We call this term as A, and we can show by usual asymptotics for econometric models that this term will converge to a normal random variable, okay, with zero mean and variance sigma bar, and sigma bar is given by this expression. So this is kind of well known. But the problem is that there is a second term that we call term B, which involves, okay, the estimation error of the non-parametric component. This part here. Okay? So this part here is usually not a problem. We can handle that. The problem is this estimator, the summation here of the variable of interest, dt, times the estimation error of the nonlinear component. And here is where machine learning estimation is playing a role. Okay? And what we know, and what the authors of the paper that we are basing ourselves here, what they show is that this second term is not going to zero. It's not converging to zero. And in fact, on the contrary, this term is diverging to infinity as the sample size grows. So basically, something that in the usual linear regression converges to a normal random variable, in here it will like converge to something that's a normal random variable, the first term here, the A, plus a term that's going to diverge. So this term will diverge, okay? So usual asymptotics with the usual estimation technique by nonlinear least squares here won't work if we are interested in inference, okay? And this scale bias, like square root t theta hat minus theta 0, is essential for hypothesis test. So how can we handle this problem? Okay? The idea is simple. It's based on a double estimation, very similar to the double lasso that we saw in the previous lectures. Okay. So basically, this term B, just to remind you, what's B is the second term here. All this term here. Okay. This term is the sum of t non-centered terms divided by square root t, and B is going to be of the stochastic order, that's square root t, times the order of the machine learning method. Okay? If the machine learning method, the estimation converges at the usual rate, then we won't have any problem. Okay? The issue here is that when you combine machine learning with large dimensions, so when you make P grows, the problem kicks in, because the convergence rate of this nonlinear component, the machine learning component, will be slower than the usual square root t. Okay? So basically, that's what I have just said. T to the power of minus phi is the rate of convergence of g hat to g naught in the root mean squared error sense. Okay? How fast g hat is approaching to g naught when we measure this divergence in terms of mean squared error. Okay? And in the non-parametric case, in large dimensions, we have phi less than 1 over 2, so less than a half. So is there a solution? Yes, what they call the authors call Neyman orthogonalization, and it's basically kind of double selection, like parceling out the effect of z from both Y, and D. And it's a very, very simple procedure that I'm going to show you. There's no very difficult mathematics. Of course, to prove the results is highly complicated. I'm not going to prove anything here. But to implement the method is pretty easy. Okay? So let's consider the following regression, W on V. And what's V? V is when we partial out the effects of Z on D. And W is when we partial out the effects of Z on Y. Okay? So this L naught Z is the expected value of Y given Z, which is like just M of Z plus G of Z. Okay? So what we are going to do is to estimate this error V. We are going to estimate this error W. How we are going to do that? We are going to put a hat on top here by putting a hat on top here, a hat on top here, put a hat on top here. And how we are going to estimate M naught hat and L naught Z? Machine learning methods. For example, neural networks or general seeds or random forest that we are going to see next lecture, so on and so forth. Okay? So, but we are going to do that in a special way because we are going to construct estimates for L and M using a different sample than the sample we are going to use to estimate the parameter of interest. Okay? So we use these estimators to compute W hat and V hat, and then we are going to obtain the de-biased or double ML estimator. That's just the OLS regression of W on V. Okay? But we are going to conduct steps 1 and 3 with different samples. So we can split the sample into 2. Okay? And if this is the case, bingo, what we'll have, we have that the rescaled bias of this new estimator, theta check, is distributed as a normal random variable with zero mean and variance sigma, and sigma is the usual variance that we expect. Okay? So then we can conduct inference on theta hat. Okay? So the procedure is about inference on this linear component, and the nonlinearity is kicking in just to control for these other observed variables zt. So just to show you how things work, we are running simulations here, and we are going to see the distribution of the parameters of interest. The red line is the expected distribution, what we should expect if theory works, and the blue is the histogram over many samples without using the debiasing technique, without using the double machine learning technique. Okay, so you see the blue histogram and the red curves are not matching; they are completely shift apart. But once you do the debiasing, you correct the procedure, then you get a much better match. So the blue histogram approaches to the red curve. Okay, so showing that the procedure works. Okay? So why it works? What's the intuition? Basically, what the authors show is that the rescaled bias can be decomposed into 3 terms: A star, B star, and C star. They show that under very mild conditions, A star will converge to a normal random variable. The second term, b star, okay, is kind of weighted covariance between the estimation, the error of the m function, and the estimation error of the L function. Okay? And basically what they show is that this term b star will converge to zero, so it vanishes for a wide variety of data generating process. Okay, we just need, for instance, that m hat and L hat to be consistent to m and L at a rate of order t to the power of 1/4. Okay, so it's a very mild condition. And then there is the third term, c hat, and they also show that this term vanish, and it vanishes. This c hat contains expressions like that. Okay? The summation of v and the estimation error of g. Okay? So they show that when they use the sample splitting, what's the sample splitting? Using different samples to estimate the function g and to compute the theta check, the estimator, this term will vanish. Okay, so basically we have like three terms. These two terms will converge in probability to zero, and this third term will converge in distribution to a normal, and then the whole thing will converge in distribution to a normal, and we can conduct inference. Okay? So it's a very, very powerful technique. So how we implement this in practice? Suppose that we have T observations, capital T observations. Okay? We are going to use a fraction of these observations to learn the target parameter, the theta. We are going to use like a tau. Tau is a fraction, can be 50%, 40%, 60%. Doesn't really matter much. Okay. And we are going to use t minus tau observations, okay, and that are not, pay attention here, not used to estimate the parameter theta, to learn the nuisance parameters. What are the nuisance parameters? The non-parametric functions. So the non-parametric functions L0 and M0 will be estimated with these remaining observations. Okay? These partitions can be randomly assigned when you have IID data. That's an important point. The setup in their paper is for IID data. Is yet to be proved that this method works in a time series framework. We believe it will work with minor changes, and one of the changes is how you split the sample. We cannot just do randomly assignments because of course you're going to break the dependence on the data. But if we use something similar to what we did with bagging, like block samples of blocks, like in the block bootstrap, probably the method will work without any problem. Okay, and there is no efficiency loss if this tau pi, the pi tau goes to zero, and will achieve full efficiency by cross-fitting. What's cross-fitting? Basically, it's the following, like a two-fold cross-fitting. Suppose that you do a random 50-50 split, okay? And you have like two sets, I, C, okay? And you estimate the parameter as follows. So you take like, let's do this in sequence, that's better. So this is I, and this is IC, okay? And you come here and you use the first sample to learn L0 and M0. And here you use to learn theta, okay? Let's call this function here the theta hat IC. But then you take the same sample, okay? I see the same split, but now you learn theta, you learn L naught and M naught with the second sample, and you learn theta with the first sample. This will be theta check, IC, I. Okay? So you have two estimators, you take the average. This is your final estimator. Basically, you have efficiency gains. We can do that for many folds. Okay, with two folds is already good enough. Okay? So this is the method that what I want to tell you about inference on generic machine learning. It's a very lively field of research. Many papers are being written on the topic, and lots of things to be done, but I think that's kind of one of the first steps to make inference possible with very flexible non-linear machine learning methods. Okay, so thank you. See you during our live session when I'm going to talk about the applications.